Hello, everyone. This is the second reading of the Shea Memorandum, continued on from my first video. In the last video, we covered sections 1 through 3. Today, since section 4 is a little bit long, about 19 pages, we more than likely will only read section 4 for this video. So continuing on, this section is titled The Israeli DEA Groups. Virtually all of the scores of individuals questioned or detained by the DEA and other federal and local law enforcement authorities were citizens of the State of Israel. They were generally organized in groups of 8 to 10 people, with a single team leader. They usually worked individually or in pairs, carrying makeshift art portfolios. They visited scores of DEA offices, laboratories, and houses or apartments, ostensibly to offer or show the paintings or prints in the portfolios for sale or promotion to DEA personnel. Section A, backgrounds in intelligence, electronic intercept, and communication units. While Israel has compulsory military service, many of those questioned by U.S. authorities had served in the military intelligence services or in electronic or communications units of the Israeli army. Thus, for example, Lior Baram of Plantation near Hollywood, Florida, questioned by the DEA on January 22, 2001, had served 2 years in Israeli intelligence working with classified information. Dilka Borenstein, questioned by INS at Dallas/Fort Worth International Airport, also known as DFW Airport, on March 27, 2001, was recently discharged military intelligence officer. Marina Glickman, questioned at DFW Airport on or about May 1, 2001, worked for an Israeli software company with expertise in handheld computer technology and had served as an Israeli military intelligence officer. Tomer Ben-Dor, also questioned at DFW Airport on that day, worked for an Israeli wiretapping company that had served in an Israeli military unit that was responsible for Patriot missile defense. The DEA's Office of Security concluded that the Israelis may well be engaged in organized intelligence gathering. A spokesman for the Immigration and Naturalization Service, also known as the INS, stated that dozens of these Israelis were expelled from the United States, from California, the Midwest, Florida, and other states. No one has tallied the total, he said. The expulsions were usually for visa violations. The leaders of the Israeli DEA groups included Itay Simon, arrested on April 14, 2001 in Irving, Texas, recently discharged from the Israeli army where he had done classified work for the Israeli military. Mr. Simon coordinated recruiting for the groups and served as an intermediary between 5 individuals in Israel in the U.S. operation. Another leader was Michael Kalmanovich, also arrested in Irving on that day, who rented a number of apartments in Irving, Texas, occupied by 25 Israelis. Mr. Kalmanovich was a recently discharged electronic intercept operator for the Israeli military. As stated in the DEA report, traveling about the U.S. to sell paintings seemed to fit the background of many of the individuals in question. A third principal was Haman Sarfati, a team leader residing in Hollywood, Florida. When questioned by the DEA in Tampa, Florida on March 1st of 2001, he had in his possession bank deposit slips amounting to more than $100,000 from December 2000 through the first quarter of 2001, and withdrawal slips for slightly less than that amount during that period. Mr. Sarfati served in the Israeli military between the ages of 18 and 21, but refused to disclose to the DEA his activities between the ages of 21 and 24, including his activities since his U.S. arrival at age 23 in 2000. Another was Pierce Segalovitz of Tamarack, Florida, about 20 miles west of Hollywood, an active officer in Israeli Special Forces Battalion who commanded 80 men in the Golan Heights. He was detained in Orlando on May 3, 2001. So a connecting point seems like I'm making from this section is that a lot of the supposed art students that were selling these portfolios of art had a background in Israeli military intelligence, signals intelligence gathering, and also, I believe it will state further in the report, worked for US-based companies as well. It's very interesting. What would the reason be for an Israeli or a former Israeli military intelligence officer, for example, having the desire to come to the US on a student visa and sell art? Section B, connections to Israeli wiretapping and telecommunication companies. Tomer Ben-Dor, as mentioned above, another Israeli of interest to the DEA, was an employee of NICE Systems Limited, an Israeli company specializing in systems and solutions for detecting, locating, monitoring, evaluating, and analyzing voice communications and other transmissions from a variety of sources, activities commonly known as wiretapping and electronic eavesdropping. NICE Systems, U.S. subsidiary, NICE Systems Incorporated, is located in Rutherford, New Jersey, adjacent to East Rutherford, where 5 members of the Israeli New Jersey groups were arrested on September 11th. When Mr. Ben-Dor was interrogated by the INS at the DFW airport in May 2001, an inspection of his bags revealed a printout containing a reference to a file entitled DEA Groups. Interesting. One member of the Israeli DEA groups, Michael Gall, who was arrested in Irving, Texas, was released on a $10,000 cash bond posted by Ophir Bear as employee of Amdocs Incorporated, an Israeli telecommunication firm with operation in the United States. The Amdocs employee described Mr. Gall as a relative. That's interesting. From what I know, I believe many Israelis call themselves brothers. That's not necessarily a blood bond, however. My family, my mother's side comes from Mormon religion, and they often call themselves brothers and sisters. So I could see the same thing occurring in another religion as well. Continuing on, Messrs. Kalmanovich and Simon above were arrested by the INS for their role in the Israelis' art selling activities without the necessary visas. They were held on $50,000 bond, which was subsequently posted through the DEA report does not say by whom. It's interesting that the DEA report does not state here who posted the bond for Messrs. Kamanovich and Simon. That's very interesting. Itai Simon, sorry. Itai Simon and Mr. Kamanovich. That's interesting that they, as leaders of the Israeli DEA groups, weren't, I guess, given the same description of who paid their bond as the others whose bonds were posted. Very interesting. Michael Gall, who was released and was basically given a description as to who paid his bond. Interesting that Mr. Kamenovich and Itai Simon weren't given the same results of who paid their bond. So they were held on $50,000 bonds, which was subsequently posted. Once again, I stated that, not DEA report doesn't state by whom. I wonder here, this is speculation, if the DEA is supposedly not necessarily hiding something, but deciding to keep that to themselves. 6 members of the Israeli DEA groups appear to have been using cell telephones that were purchased by a former Israeli vice consul in the United States. Israeli surveillance of U.S. government offices, labs, and residences, and other strategic areas. During the first 5 months of 2001, and including a few calls in 2000, the Israeli DEA groups went to a total of about 57 DEA locations, 28 offices, and 29 residences, primarily in the southern United States, ostensibly offering to sell or solicit an interest in paintings. Now, I need to research on my end more of this, but I do understand that during this time, the DEA was investigating an Israeli ecstasy ring. That's all I'll say about it, but I understand that this may have been, no, this is speculation and I won't go further into it, but some people may make the argument that this may have been part of the reason as to why the strategic choice of persons to target for these art portfolio sales were the DEA employees, given that the DEA was running an active investigation against an Israeli MDMA ring, or known as ecstasy ring. These included 25 DEA offices and 3 labs, the DEA Southwest Laboratory near San Diego and the residences of its director, the DEA Southeast Laboratory in Miami and the residences of 3 of its chemists, and the DEA South Central Laboratory, a property adjacent to it, as well as the residences of 1 of its chemists and other employee. One Israeli asked to visit the house of a DEA employee to match the frame to his furnishing, and offer the employee declined. Members of the Israeli DEA groups were also discovered taking photographs of a DEA office and building and parking lot in Orlando, Florida, and on active runway at the Volk Field Air National Guard based at Camp Douglas, Wisconsin. An Air Force alert was issued from Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma City concerning possible Israeli intelligence gathering at the base. Israeli personnel were also found taking a photograph of the house of a special agent of the Environmental Protection Agency in Denver, Colorado, and diagramming the inside of an office building of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms in Lexington, Kentucky. Section D, spying on the United States. The Israeli DEA groups are clearly spying on the Drug Enforcement Agency and thus upon the United States. Many individuals in DEA groups may have been trying to do no more than sell paintings, albeit in a violation of their visa status and thus unlawfully, but the total number of visits to DEA offices, laboratories, and residences precludes any characterization of these efforts as a commonplace sales endeavor. The DEA report speculates that the spying by the Israeli DEA groups was related to an ongoing ecstasy investigation. Once again, I've stated that. I'm going to read this footnote real quick. Footnote 31 that is described here is CDEA report, page 1. Pierre Segalovitz was asked about and confirmed that he was aware of Israeli organized crime involvement in drug smuggling and weapons smuggling. They do more research on that. However, that does confirm the comment I stated earlier about an ongoing ecstasy investigation from the DEA. In the course of an earlier ecstasy investigation, the DEA feared its communication systems had been compromised. It's not good. One of the difficulties in analyzing the DEA report is that it is reactive. The bulk of its records, the activities of the Israeli DEA groups when they call upon or attempt to infiltrate DEA offices, laboratories, or residences. The DEA did not generally seek them out, keep them under surveillance, or otherwise try to find out what they were doing, other than making calls on and photographing or diagramming the facilities of the DEA and other governmental agencies. Why wouldn't they do that? If they had known that in an earlier investigation, their systems of communication may have been compromised, and they see that there is a potential signals intelligence gathering by the Israelis on their activities, on their surveillance of different labs and residences and DEA offices. Why wouldn't they then go and investigate and keep tabs on these people? Interesting for me to hear. When the DEA report was prepared, however, the DEA and the INS were, of course, unaware of the extensive activities and operations in the United States of the future September 11th hijackers and their suspected collaborators, whom the Israeli DEA groups appear to have had in their sights as well. Why the Israeli DEA groups would be engaged in both activities where their spying on the DEA would clearly raise suspicion among U.S. law enforcement authorities is unclear. It may well have been an effective distraction of others from or cover from their primary objective. This question is discussed further below at page 43. It'll be interesting to explore, given what's provided on page 43. We'll take a look at that once we get there. Israeli surveillance of Arab groups, the future hijackers, and FBI subjects. Israel's Institute for Intelligence and Special Tasks, commonly known as Mossad, is the Israeli agency responsible for its external security. A few days after September 11th, Israeli intelligence officials reported that two senior experts of Mossad had warned the United States in August of 2001, most notably August 23rd of 2001, in a vague manner as well, that large-scale terrorist attacks on the U.S. mainland were imminent. They also informed U.S. officials of the existence of a cell as many as 200 terrorists preparing the operation. That's interesting because we know of 19 terrorists. Now, I do understand that TMZ had done an investigation. TMZ, of all people as well, of all groups as well, did an investigation on United Flight 23 and the potential fifth plane that could have been hijacked on 9/11. Now, there is research from DJ Thermal Detonator as well as Adam Fitzgerald that states that there could have potentially been more, but as many as 200 terrorists. That's a very, very large number compared to what the official narrative is. Many people don't know that there were other targeted or potential targeted attacks on the days of 9/11 or post 9/11. But yes, here's some preliminary statements that relate to that. So one highly placed investigator stated later that fall that there was evidence linking the Israeli DA groups to the gathering of intelligence about the September 11th attacks. He refused to disclose the evidence, however, since it was classified. Why is it still classified 22 years later? Which is very interesting to me. Why is it still classified 22 years later? Actually, yeah, 22 years later, almost to the date. A highly regarded American journal that broadly covers Israeli affairs reported in December of 2001 that the Israeli DEA groups were spying on Islamic networks in the United States linked to Mossad terrorism. And general. I'm sorry, I misspoke there. I'll start again. A highly regarded American journal that broadly covers Israeli affairs reported in December of 2001 that the Israeli DEA groups are spying on Islamic networks in the United States linked to Middle East terrorism. Sorry, it's a little late. There was no implication in these reports that the Israelis were involved in planning for or carrying out the September 11th attacks. That's an important statement. It goes back up to Gerald Shea's comment on the fact that we don't want to focus our we don't want to surmise that the entire country of Israel was responsible for this, because that would just be once again, a surmise that would be based on not too good evidence. It wouldn't be a good thing. Definitely would be opening the gates for others to call you anti-Semitic, which is not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to be very careful with what I say. So that is not my position. But it does seem that there was an organized intelligence gathering operation related to the DEA, as well as investigating the Arab terrorists related to the 9/11 attacks that were being closely monitored by Mossad and the Israeli intelligence groups. So it's very interesting to see what they would know. However, unfortunately, we don't know that, because the first crime that these Israeli art students committed was a visa violation. So they immediately get deported through the INS. Unfortunately, that's kind of a smart move on their end. However, not a smart move on our end to not halt that process from occurring. Section F, Hollywood, Florida, the operating base of the Israeli DEA groups. The locus of the most important operation of the Israeli DEA groups was an area in and around Hollywood, Florida. The majority of the incidents have occurred in the southern half of the continental U.S., with most activity reported in the state of Florida. Hollywood seems to be a central point for these individuals, with several having addresses in this area. Emphasis supplied. At the very time the DEA was setting down these words in June of 2001, just 2 or 3 months before the September 11th hijackings, 15 of the 19 hijackers were also living in Hollywood, 9 in the town itself and 6 in the surrounding towns. Hollywood for months had been and would continue to be the staging ground for the hijacking of the World Trade Center planes and the Pennsylvania plane. Among the Israeli groups, more than 30 lived in the Hollywood area, 10 in Hollywood itself. They were not only spying on the DEA, but in all likelihood were keeping the future hijackers under surveillance as well. This appears to be in the tragic riddle the DEA, unaware of the future hijackers' existence, was unable to solve. Hanan Sarfati, stopped and questioned by the DEA, as noted above, on March 1st of 2001, lived in Hollywood. Another leader, Legum Yashai, lived in Miami. One of the 5 members of the Israeli New Jersey group arrested on September 11th lived in Miami Beach. Lior Baram, the former Israeli intelligence officer, though stopped at the DEA facility in Houston, Texas may have been a DEA group training area, as noted below, lived in Plantation, Florida, about 10 miles west of Hollywood. Pierre Segalovitz, the Israeli Special Forces lieutenant, and his brother lived in Tamarack, just north of Fort Lauderdale. Akil Sagif, a former bodyguard to the Israeli army's top-ranking general, appears to have lived in Hollywood or in Coral Springs. For the precise location of the relevant towns in Hollywood area, see Map 1. This concludes my reading of the Shea Memorandum. We read today in this video Section 4, which covered the Israeli DEA groups, their backgrounds and intelligence, and their backgrounds and connections to different companies of Israeli companies that had conduct in wiretapping and were also based in the telecommunications industry, and also where we saw these Israeli groups surveilling different DEA offices and laboratories, as well as residences of different DEA chemists, as well as DEA employees. We also saw the connection between the Israeli DEA group and their spying on the DEA, as well as Arab groups related to the September 11th attacks. And we also saw that majority of these Israeli art students were living in a very close location as to where the Arab terrorists were also living. So this will conclude our video for today of reading the Shea Memorandum. I will post a video tomorrow of the reading of sections 5 through 7, and we'll continue from there. I'm hoping that this video provides a good amount of information for the viewer to where they can be more better informed about this situation and can further research the events of 9/11. I hope to build my channel by reading more of these important documents related to the attacks of September 11th. Hopefully this video and after this Shea Memorandum video raw reading is concluded, I will continue on to read the official 9/11 Commission report, and we'll be talking about the different areas which I refute in that report, so that unfortunately, well, many people involved in the 9/11 truth movement haven't even read the 9/11 Commission report, which is unfortunate, but hopefully my channel will provide a reading. If your attention span is long enough, more than likely my videos will be about an hour long when it comes to that, because the commission report is a pretty long report. So yes, when I get to that, once the Shea Memorandum is complete, I will more than likely continue on, and that will be my next playlist of videos. So I hope this video is informative, and I hope everyone has a good rest of their day. Thank you.